Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats. Let's get something straight, Bryan, here. I've been saying you have 3 nicknames. Producer is not a nickname. It just occurred to me. So you actually only have 2 nicknames, but I say producer. Unless maybe we could go with the producer, but that seems like a lame nickname. This is a really long...
I don't know. Let's say we're at some big, undercover crime meetup, and we're like, we got this new guy we're going to introduce to the gang. We call him the producer. I would worry about that guy, I think.
Are we allowed to, though, call you the producer as a nickname when we're just describing your job title?
It's a good point.
I don't know. Like if you were like the clean, like if we called back in the day, he's so terrible now. Like the first name that popped in my head, let's say Mike Trout. I think he bats 4th usually. But if we
is Mike Trout terrible now? Man, I'm getting old.
No, I was actually thinking Carlos Gonzalez because I was going to do Argo for the Rockies, but no, he doesn't belong. I was like, if we called Mike Trout the cleanup hitter, it might be out Pujols, though I don't know. But if we called one of them the cleanup hitter, it's like, well, that's just what they do. It's way too long. All right, this is in theory a basketball podcast primarily, although a sports show. So we're going to talk to some of the kind of the end of the NBA season. We're coming up on the end of it. Bryan is a Warriors fan. I am a Nuggets fan. We have much to discuss on both of those. We're going to talk, I guess, kind of some March Madness. Actually, it occurs to me, Bryan, I didn't even put the Maryland team. I don't remember their name. Their full name.
University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
And
the Golden Retrievers is their mascot.
Wait, wow, there've got to be some people that had that in their bracket just because they like the mascot. I know some people go for things like that. So we're going to talk about them. Maybe, actually, they weren't on the script, but we're going to talk UConn, March Madness, women's sports, what's good or bad for sport. Daniel Bryan, for those of you who don't know, at the day of this recording, he just got cleared to wrestle again, so that's going to be interesting. And if we find time, I keep bringing this up, this like my side hobby, because it half relates to some of my interests. We might talk Billy Mitchell and point scandals in speed running high score arcade games, which I guess we can tie in subtly, Bryan, by saying it's slow, kind of related to esports, kind of related to Twitch. Anyway, let's start with this. I complain about this a lot, but we're just going to do it again, Bryan. The Nuggets with a loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, I believe they were an 18 or 19 loss streak, thanks to, I think, some field artillery or military artillery. I think Robin Lopez had a funny quote about something like that, tanking. They lost to Memphis and probably out of the playoffs. Now, strictly, they're not 100% dead. They had a close win against Miami the other day, but the Nuggets currently sit in 10th place. I believe they're 2 or 3 games back. They're going to have to win out against some tough competition and hope that San Antonio, Utah, the Pelicans, Minnesota, and the Clippers, who are also out of the playoffs, that none of them play better than us. And candidly, all of those teams, actually, it's interesting. Up through San Antonio, kind of, I would argue Utah, New Orleans, Minnesota, and the Clippers all have a really, really talented big, and unlike the Nuggets, they actually realize to play that big. We don't have a bunch of time for it today. One of my I do have time for this, Bryan. So apologies, it wasn't on the script. So we're going to talk Utah a little. So Donovan Mitchell, I was involved in something like this a few weeks back, and it's happened again. So somebody had a funny tweet, like not a huge follower person. That's why it's important. So somebody said on Twitter, they were making fun of an Alanis Morissette song. I'll try and find the tweet, Bryan. But they said, it's like meeting the woman of your dreams and then finding out she'd take Donovan Mitchell over Ben Simmons in Rookie of the Year. So, making fun of I'm pretty sure making fun of the lyric and ironic, meeting the man of my dreams, meeting his beautiful wife, and then taking a dig at Donovan Mitchell and taking the same take we have, which is Donovan Mitchell versus Ben Simmons for Rookie of the Year is not a question. Now, an out to revisit this topic is, if we go kind of historically, I have no problem calling Donovan Mitchell a star by conventional wisdom and a Rookie of the Year candidate by conventional wisdom. For instance, some players that we don't think had any business winning Rookie of the Year, I'm going to put my hands up immediately, were Kevin Durant and LeBron James. Kevin Durant and LeBron James are 2 of the greatest players to ever play the game of basketball. LeBron James is number 1 on Mount Rushmore, and Kevin Durant, depending on how he finishes out his, he's already a first ballot Hall of Famer, no question. And depending how he finishes out his career, could be one of the top 10. I don't quite know where I'd put him. I don't think I'd put him top 10 yet, just because of full resume, if that makes sense, but he's really close. I'd say Kevin Durant is really close because, he's been, two finals so far, right? Because he got the finals MVP. He's got a regular season MVP. He's been the scoring leader a few times. So certainly close. But both these players were great. But as rookies, Kevin Durant was god-awful as a rookie, and LeBron James was more similar to Donovan Mitchell, where it's like he was a mediocre to bad NBA player, which means he was close to an average rookie. But, there were still better players. I believe like Chris Bosh was a far better rookie than LeBron James. Now, the out people will give is like, well, what about their age? That's fine, right? I'm not saying it's wrong. And again, I'm saying there is a case for Donovan Mitchell's Rookie of the Year based on historical precedent. But I'm saying from the way to phrase it, so the comeback is, I'm not saying Donovan Mitchell isn't a star. I'm not saying Donovan Mitchell isn't Rookie of the Year material based on the criteria we've seen in the past for it. What I am saying is, if you are a fan of the Utah Jazz and are happy with their recent performance of winning, Donovan Mitchell has not been a part of that. If anything, he has been a detriment to that. The real reason, this isn't a hard shock, I called it a Kobe problem when I was talking to Dave Barry about this, is Rudy Gobert. The Jazz started okay. Gobert gets injured. They do bad. Gobert comes back. They do really well since Rudy Gobert gets back. This defensive-minded big who is awesome in the NBA, who the numbers say is awesome. Donovan Mitchell is a below-average scorer on a below-average offense team. If someone says, well, somebody has to take the shots, true, but if he takes the shots and they're below average, he hasn't done anything. I'm gonna tie this a little into the Nuggets in a second, but I'll just finish off my point. So somebody made a joke about Donovan Mitchell, very similar to the one I made a few weeks ago, where I said, all Donovan Mitchell is good at is taking lots of shots. He's not actually productive. He's not anywhere close to Ben Simmons. Donovan Mitchell liked my tweet, and I got a lot of vitriol. In fact, what I love is Chris Ye has now got two milestones on our channel, Bryan. So Chris Ye was the guest when we talked about Donovan Mitchell versus Lonzo Ball. Chris Ye, up until that point, had, I think, the most watched video we had before. We did a Ben Simmons one that was higher, but for a while, Chris Ye was on like the most watched YouTube video we had, which was like on Lonzo Ball, because obviously Lakers fans like him. He is now on the most downvoted show we've ever had. I had to remove a comment. I don't normally moderate the comments too much on the YouTube channel. But someone was like, I only watched 18 minutes of this, but you guys are horrible, and then proceeded to go for 3 paragraphs. So they were like, I didn't watch hear my thoughts. I was like, okay, well, you didn't do the homework, so I'm going to have to, give you an incomplete and tossed it. But we now have the most downvoted show. Chris Ye has been on that as well. But got a lot of vitriol from Donovan Mitchell fans because of that. Someone else, like I said, with like 200 followers made a Donovan Mitchell tweet. Donovan Mitchell liked that. So the funny note about this, and I'm not surprised and I'm not mad at it, but it means that Donovan Mitchell name searches himself on Twitter and likes it when people, disrespect him. So that's amusing. I think that's kind of funny. And it's fascinating in a way that we already know this. It's easy to think that someone who is famous or who is top of the world, because whatever we say about Donovan Mitchell as an NBA player, we have to give that caveat. So here's an interesting example of the March Madness tournament, which we may or may not talk on the show. Maryland, Baltimore County is the first number 16 seed to upset a number 1 seed. That might sound amazing, but it's there have been fewer than 216 versus number 1 games, so I still don't consider it that crazy. But there are 64 teams that make the March Madness tournament. I looked it up, and I believe there are like 300 or so eligible Division I schools, if I got the math right. If I didn't, apologies. But I was thinking about that. I was like, top 60 out of like 300 plus in most schools is a B plus, right? If you're thinking about the curve, you'd be high 80s with that if you were top 64 out of like 300 something, right? I believe that's. Am I crazy on that, Bryan?
Well, I won't dispute your math, but let's also not forget there's the NIT tournament as well. There's a backup tournament, so if you go like 17 and 15 or whatever, I don't know if that adds up, you're going to go to the tournament of some type.
So let me ask something, because I'm going to show my ignorance, but you might know better. So according to this, there are 347 Division I schools across 49 states. Are there other schools that are eligible to make the March Madness tournament that aren't Division I schools? No,
there's not. It's
so
just,
that's my, okay.
Yeah.
So that's my point. I mean,
which state doesn't have a Division I school? Is Alaska Anchorage not Division I? Because I know University of Hawaii is.
I have no idea. Okay. So to be more accurate, not a B plus. Apologies. So you would be like in the 82nd plus percentile if you were talking grading on the curve. You're top 18%. So basically, when we're looking at schools and we're like, can you believe this huge upset? It's like all of those schools are good. They're top, across all college athletics, they're amazing, right? Because there are thousands of college athletic programs or teams, but at least across the eligible one, 347, and this is the same point of the NBA, it's, these are the top of the top of the top. So when you're like, this huge upset, you're like, well, true, but understand this is the best of the best of the best. Same is true of Donovan Mitchell. I'm bashing him in the context of 150 NBA starters, right? I'm saying I don't think he's an above average NBA starter. There are only, 150 NBA starters. That's the best of the best of the best. Any like Six Sigma thing or whatever, his place, as I've noted, any player that's made the NBA probably belongs in the Naismith Hall of Fame just based on their skills of a basketball player, because to get into the NBA means you were tremendously good as an athlete. So, but just to Donovan Mitchell's point, no matter how good you think someone is, no matter how famous, no matter how rich, no matter how whatever, people still have interesting egos. So I just found that amusing is how I'll phrase that.
Yeah, to be continued. Like, who knows? Maybe he's amused. Maybe he's having fun. I don't know. We'll see.
And I mean, whatever it takes to motivate people. One of the more interesting, I've heard this point, if you look over Michael Jordan's career, his Hall of Fame speech is really telling, because he bought a lot of hype and stuff that either, this makes any sense, knows isn't true or is a lie he told himself enough to believe it's true. So one of the biggest myths about Michael Jordan is that he was cut from his high school basketball team. The correct phrasing of this was, Michael Jordan was a junior varsity basketball player on a good squad. His friend was given an exemption to be on the varsity squad, which Michael Jordan was not. The reason his friend was given an exemption was because his friend was a big. Michael Jordan, throughout his entire career, has been a guard. So, like, the comparison would be if Michael Jordan was a star running back in high school and his friend, a quarterback, was given a promotion to the varsity squad. Michael Jordan wasn't passed over for the position. Michael Jordan wasn't cut. Michael Jordan just wasn't on the varsity squad when he wasn't allowed to be on the varsity squad. If I'm not mistaken, am I wrong on this? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar only has 3 seasons of varsity in college, because I think there used to be a rule you couldn't be a varsity as a freshman.
That's correct. Yeah, that's
correct.
Which
is nuts, right? So Michael Jordan wasn't cut. There was just a rule in place about varsity versus JV, and it was an age restriction thing that they made an exemption for a taller player than Michael Jordan. At his Hall of Fame speech, Michael Jordan flew in the player and the coach that passed him over to talk about it in his speech. And you think to yourself, you are, without doubt, the most beloved NBA player in history.
Don't let Kobe fans hear you say that. Sorry, go ahead, Dre.
Yeah, well, even then, I mean, like, Michael Jordan arguably is Kobe kryptonite, in that if we go up to Kobe fans and go, listen, it is not a question of Tim Duncan or Kobe, or of, to be mean, the exact same draft, right? Of Steve Nash or Kobe, or LeBron James or Kobe, right? Like, I think Michael Jordan is the one player you're allowed to say where they're like, okay, you got a point. But so, most adored NBA player in NBA history, always listed as the greatest, even though, we think that that's tenuous, right? We think, for instance, Magic Johnson probably has a pretty clear call for a similar era. We'll get to him in a bit. As well as, like, at this point, my argument is that LeBron James has lapped Michael Jordan. And one disadvantage LeBron James has had is he's had some bad finals, but this isn't a hard comparison. LeBron James, I believe, has made 8 or 9 finals. What's the final tally?
Yeah, something like that. And his team was not the best team in most of those finals.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. And Michael Jordan's only, I'll put in quote, made 9, Michael Jordan's finals only made 6 NBA finals. LeBron James has made 8 or 9. I want to know for sure for that, so I'm gonna look that up in just a second. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is 8. So he has made 8 NBA finals. That's 2 more than Michael Jordan, and age-wise, it's different as well. I always hate the argument, well, they played bad in the finals. It's like, you understand that playing poorly in the finals because you played really well to get to the finals trumps not playing in the finals, I would hope. So, Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, but obviously LeBron James does. But as mentioned, most people will still say Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan. He was still bitter about this at the end. So it is very clear that there might be a weird chicken and the egg top athletes, top performers might use things like this to keep themselves motivated. And then a scary thing, like a metacognition point, is we start to believe our own hype. We start to believe our own lies. We're not going to talk too much Trump, if any, if we can avoid it. We just don't have to, we'll be behind. That's the problem. I bet I'm already behind on what I'm caught up on Trump if I talk about him on this show. And by the time I actually publish, because I'm always a couple days behind there too, Bryan, the excuse I'll give to listeners, apologies for last week. I know the podcast went out late. I think the show still isn't public on the YouTube channel. I got my taxes done, so woo, but that definitely takes a dent out of your free time. But, by the time this comes out, we'll be 3-4 stories behind Trump. But a point we've heard about Trump is maybe he just believes what he's telling himself. And that makes it much harder. And the same might be true of athletes. They tell themselves a narrative to keep themselves motivated. That narrative fills itself until they actually believe it. And then towards the end, you're like, everybody loves you. Nobody hates you. Everybody always respected you. And they're like, yeah, but these people disrespected me, which is what it is.
Oh, that one guy in high school, Jordan. I see. Okay, yeah. You tie it all together. I got it. I think I'll when I listen back, sometimes, occasionally, I'm pretty good at it. I think of starting a thread and then keeping it together towards the end. There have been a few times in last week's show it happened. I just start talking. I'm like, I have no idea what started this rambling. Oh, I can tell you, it's Nuggets.
Well, no, I said I was going to get to the Nuggets based on Donovan.
Oh, okay.
Here's the tie-in. Donovan Mitchell is a below average shooter on a below average offense. And people might say, well, he has to. And my response is well, why don't you try? So if they're already a below average offense, what do you have to lose by trying something else? What do you have to lose by giving Rudy Gobert 2 more shots a game and Joe Ingles 1 more shot a game and one other player 1 more shot a game? I call it, I might have to write this up at some point, Bryan. We discussed it on the show a week or two back, I think with Chris, where I called it the 1 a quarter, where if you have a player and we're they shoot too much or they do this too little, you just ask yourself, could they just do 1 fewer shot a quarter? Or, for instance, minutes, we're going to talk the Nuggets. Nikola Jokic, he's the only MVP caliber player on his squad that doesn't lead his team in minutes or so it's a weird if, because you could argue Steph Curry versus Durant on the Warriors. But he doesn't lead his squad in minutes played, and he's below 32 minutes a game, which is baffling to me. And some people might say conditioning, but my response might be, okay, well, what about this? What if you just give him 30 seconds extra a quarter? What if you make each of his shifts in each quarter 15 seconds longer, and you'd give him 30 more seconds a quarter, 2 more minutes in a game? You don't play the legs off of him, but that right there could, 30 seconds a game or 2 minutes a game of Nikola Jokic could be a huge difference. Same thing with Donovan Mitchell. What if you give him 1 fewer shot a quarter? So I think that's not a bad way to think about things. Break it up into in a quarter and what could you increase or decrease by per quarter and how much that could help your winning or losing. But on to the Nuggets. Same point. I was talking a little Millsap. So I hated the Millsap signing. I still hate the Millsap signing. We gave him $30 million for 2 years. There's a third year, I believe, team option. So it's a little better. But it was just a horrible signing. It wasn't what we needed. Now, we lucked out. So my first take was I really wanted a guard for the Nuggets. I really thought we needed a point guard. Now, we've really lucked out in that Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Will Barton, as a backcourt, have played really well together. But you didn't know that preseason. And if you'd told me preseason that Jamal Murray was going to turn up, I wouldn't have believed you. And it harkens back to, keep bringing it back to Donovan Mitchell and previously Emmanuel Mudiay. I never like giving the keys to the squad to a young player, to a first or second year, because there have been a couple great ones. Ben Simmons is great, for instance, as a point guard. Rajon Rondo is pretty good. Chris Paul was amazing. But typically, you don't know what you're going to get with a young player, so you shouldn't put your franchise in the hands of a rookie or sophomore point guard. But luckily, Jamal Murray turned it up, so they're doing okay. But Paul Millsap, so, we kind of dodged that bullet, but we certainly need a better wing than Wilson Chandler. There's so much you could have done with that $30 million. And Paul Millsap was, we thought in his prime, a good player, but he is declining. You can look at his numbers. His numbers have been declining. He's over 30. It's that is never the contract I want to go for. And the other point I would give you is, at his peak, we thought Paul Millsap was a very good player. I'd probably argue top 20, top 30 in the NBA, probably, Bryan. That being said, I would easily make the argument that Paul Millsap probably, now it might be borderline, but I'll explain that we don't like this. It might be borderline. I don't think he was ever a max contract guy. Now, in general, our philosophy on players is you never want to overpay for contracts. And in the NBA, there's a cheat code, which is if you get an MVP caliber player, let's say maybe all NBA, real all NBA. So like the Boxscore Geeks all NBA. We can list our NBA, all NBA, which is, the top 15 players kind of with some position adjusting, right? Because there's 2 guards, 2 forwards, a center on each all NBA squad. If we talk like the top 15 Boxscore Geeks all NBA players, those players are always underpaid. Those players you can never pay as much as they're worth because the max contract is capped. Like LeBron James, Dwayne Wade in their prime on the old salary cap were probably worth $50 million a season. You could only pay them $20 to $25 million. On the new, it's nuts to think about that, right, Brian? On the new salary cap system, there have to be players in the NBA worth $100 million a year. I haven't looked at it, but I mean like. I've got to buy that like Durant or Curry or LeBron James this year are going to be worth $100 million a season if you do the kind of weird back of the napkin math of, which I don't 100% agree with, but we might talk about, where you take all of the wins in the NBA, which averages to 1,230, right? There are 1,230 games, so 1,230 wins in an NBA season. If you take the total bankroll, which is going to be like over $1 billion, divide it by that, and then multiply out by the wins, I think there are going to have to be some players that are worth $100 million. You can never pay them. And then, of course, rookie contracts are always underpriced. So it's like we never think you should overpay for a player's contract or even paying close to value for an expensive contract. So my other philosophy is if you would never have given the person a max contract in their prime, why the hell are you giving it to them when they're 32 and their age curve is showing this? So I hated the Millsap signing. I did make the point that I thought, okay, well, with Millsap, you know what? He's taking minutes away from productive players. So Trey Lyles has exceeded my expectations. More Mitchell hate. It all comes back to Donovan Mitchell, Brian. Trey Lyles, in my opinion, has been a better player than Donovan Mitchell. So far, the Nuggets have won the Donovan Mitchell for Trey Lyles trade. Now, I've got to bring this up, Brian. You go to Basketball Reference and look up Rudy Gobert. I got to read this to you. This is one of the most painful things to read over. In 2013, the Denver Nuggets drafted Rudy Gobert with the 27th pick in the NBA draft. That was going to pay him out over his first 4 seasons, $1 million in 2014, $1.1 million in 2015, 1.2 with rounding in 2016, and 2.1 with rounding in 2.1 with rounding in 2017. So a grand total of $5 million plus his bird rights, right? That's all Rudy Gobert was going to cost. And we had him on our squad. We traded him to the Utah Jazz for Eric Green in cash considerations. If anybody knows, I'd really like to see how much. But there's no conceivable way the cash considerations were that great because I guarantee you they didn't offer like more than he was going to cost per season. Now Eric Green played a grand total of 46 games for the Denver Nuggets before we waived him. Then he was re-signed by the Utah Jazz, who then waived him. So we traded Rudy Gobert for a player that we barely played that we then let on waivers that was then picked up by Utah. So Utah got both players still, and all we got was cash for it. That is one of the worst trades in NBA history. Even it's an interesting perspective, which is if you have a good draft pick, they're usually not worth selling. And it's like, I don't think there is a case. The Nuggets, for instance, in NBA history, bought Ty Lawson off of the Minnesota Timberwolves, I believe, just for cash considerations. And then this last offseason, the Golden State Warriors bought Jordan Bell for cash considerations. It's like, if a team wants to buy your draft pick and you think you've drafted okay and they want to buy it, like tell them to F off and just keep the player. It's just not worth it. But anyway, so it all comes back to that. We could have had like Gobert, which just depresses me. But Millsap was not worth it in his prime. And I was saying, he's hurting our bigs because it was Trey Lyles, which was the connection to Utah. Trey Lyles is a good big. Nikola Jokic is a good big. If we give him minutes, Kenneth Faried's a good big. I'm going to talk that in a second to reiterate a point I've made on that. Mason Plumlee's a good big. My thought is, why don't you just move Paul Millsap to the 3? Why don't you take Wilson Chandler, kick him to the curve, put Paul Millsap there? I had some people that are like, well, he's never really played that. He might be out of position. And so that's the last point I'm going to get to on the Nuggets, which is defense, which is to say on both Donovan Mitchell and Paul Millsap, I'm like, what is the harm in trying a strategy that has at least some thought behind it? This is the freaking Nick Uren thing that everybody thinks was genius, or the Stan Van Gundy playing Rasheed Wallace? Which Rich Rasheed?
There's Rashard Lewis and Rasheed Wallace. Those are two separate guys.
Yeah, two different players. I combined them in my head. That explains why I didn't make sense. Rashard Lewis, playing Rashard Lewis at the 4. These are just like back of the.
This is Orlando days you're talking, right? Stan Van Gundy at Orlando.
Off of the top of their head, things that don't have a lot of data, but just have a hunch. I'm like, playing Paul Millsap at the 3, given his size and abilities and whatever, I don't see a problem with that. That would help him out. So it is just kind of like one of these with the Nuggets. I'm like, if you bought Paul Millsap for that contract and then play him as a big, which is what they're doing, you're just hurting the squad, which is just painful as hell to me. And, it's disappointing to watch the Nuggets. The Nuggets should have been a playoff team this season. If nothing else, Brian, it would have been fun if they were the number 7 or number 8 seed. And then like I have an excuse to like fly to Denver to see my family and maybe find an excuse to catch a game. That would have been amazing. No. That's part about the Nuggets, which bugs me, is their defense. And I've talked this before. So the Nuggets are not good at defense. That goes without saying. But here's what irks me. The reason for Paul Millsap was in theory to help their defense. That's the logic I've heard. And a lot of people point to like Nikola Jokic and are like, this guy is horrible at defense. This team can't win with Nikola Jokic, as great as he is offensively. And I've looked at this 2 years in a row. And I tweeted a little bit about this today. But if you look at what the Nuggets are really, really bad at, and this is kind of surprising. Now, they are average at fouls, about average at the number of shots they let go in the paint. They are below average. So you can, if you go to basketballreference.com and do like seasons 2017. So sorry, I wish I could. One of these days we'll figure out a way where either of us can drive, Brian, or I actually give you preparation so you know what you're going for. But if you go to like basketballreference.com/leagues and then 2018, one of the cool things that the NBA actually has is they have shooting by team shooting and opponent shooting. So what the opponents do. So if you look at pretty much all teams in the NBA, where they basically give up points if we're talking versus average. So the wins produced formula does this, good formulas do this. It's just, you look at league average. League average is 52.2% effective field goal percentage. So essentially, if you give up more than that on a given shot, you are giving up points. And if you give up less than that, you're a better than average offense or defense, probably. Now, where most teams, and by most I pretty much mean all teams, where all teams give up on this is from 2 spots: from the paint, 0 to 3 feet, and we're talking effective field goal percentage. True shooting percentage includes free throw shooting. We're going to leave that off the table for this discussion because the Nuggets are average at fouling. They don't foul above average, so I'm not worried about that. The 2 places that teams give up, though, is the paint, 0 to 3 feet, and from 3-point. So the Nuggets, if we look at the number of shots they give up in the paint, they actually, I did a Control F, and it turns out that Denver shows up like 14 times, so it took me to the top of the screen. All right, so Denver Nuggets, if you look at the percentage of field goal by distance, Denver is actually 24th in the NBA in shots they give up in the paint, meaning the teams get off the shot from 0 to 3 feet. Now, where Denver is hurt is they are the 5th worst team in the NBA, 69% they give up. So there's an interesting trade-off here, though. They don't give up a ton of shots in the paint, but they are really, really bad at defending the shots in the paint. But the place that hurts them much more, actually, looking it up compared to league average, is 3-point shooting. They give up 37.4% a shooting rate. And then actually only 33.4% of the opponent shots. But if we compare those two, 0 to 3 feet versus 3-point, where the Nuggets are hurt is that they are a poor perimeter defending team. And if we look at this year is a little better. They've improved on turnover percentage. But last year they were like dead last in turnover efficiency. So the Nuggets' weakness, this is what's funny. If you talk about the Nuggets, you're like, they have a bad defensive squad. Is what always irks me about stats, and that a lot of new stats are helping us overcome, is you go, why? I hate it when someone says LeBron James leads the NBA in RPM. For what it's worth, and we might tease this little at the end, Brian, about position adjustment and stuff. LeBron James, according to us, is the best player in the NBA. He leads the league in wins produced right now. But if someone says this player leads the league in wins produced, we can tell you why. We can say he's good at this. And one of our back burner projects of the future is to tell you exactly what that translates to, if that makes any sense. But we'll leave that on the back burner for now. If someone tells you a player is like best in RPM, you're like, why? Why are they the best in RPM? And if someone tells you a team has a bad defense, this is where it gets fun. It's hard to do it at the player level. But at the team level, we can say they are really bad at 3-point defense. And at least last year, they were really bad at turnover efficiency. So it's like, And then you go, well, Jokic is bad possibly at defending the paint, which I'm not going to dispute. But if you're going to fix their defense, why would you focus on the fifth or sixth problem on defense? And this is a roundabout way of me saying I miss Fareed. It's like, I really hate it when squads and people notice a problem. Another example, to bring it all back to Donovan Mitchell versus Ben Simmons, is I keep talking Ben Simmons and people keep saying, he doesn't have a three-point shot. He doesn't have a three-point shot. Oh, my God, you can't have a point guard without a three-point shot. It's the end of the world. You need a three-point shot, which I love because a few years ago, like Morey ball, like if we look at the number of threes teams took, it's had this huge uptick recently. So it's amusing that suddenly people realized the three was important but didn't used to. It used to be jump shots, so at least we're moving in the right direction. And I go, if you look at Ben Simmons, for example, the one easy thing, and this is kind of crazy, Bryan, if he would just fix his free throw shooting to be like 70%, he's already amazing. He'd be like amazing in Europe. And so it's like, if someone's like, he needs to work on his 3-point shot, I'm like, well, there are other problems. And I would argue free throw shooting is both more important and easier to fix, things to fix first. On the Nuggets defense, I'd go, why are you worried about Fareed and Jokic's D when the numbers say there are bigger problems in front? So in terms of the Nuggets, just to complain, they're probably out of the playoffs with a loss to Memphis. A huge part of it is both signing Millsap, and then they keep insisting on playing him in front of better players. And there are other problems that we needed to shore up that weren't Millsap. I guess all I can say is I love the Nuggets, and what's annoyed the hell out of me is I've never been able to quit them because they've kept a consistent stream of just a big that I love from time to, so, it started with Marcus Camby, right? Marcus Camby, one of the most underrated players of all time, amazing player on the Nuggets. I'm like, I love you, Marcus Camby. He's going to get traded. It's like, okay, well, maybe I can give up on the Nuggets. They get Kenneth Faried, dynamic, amazing. I love the Manimal. He's one of the most productive players in the NBA. It looks like they're going to start benching. I'm like, okay, finally I can give up on the stupid squad. They get Nikola Jokic, and I'm like, God damn it. So I'm stuck with the Nuggets as long as they have an underrated big that I just absolutely adore. It is so frustrating to watch them underperform, and I feel this is a common problem for NBA teams where it's, and we might talk this when we get to the Warriors. It's like when you're a team, you should really focus. I keep coming back to the geeky thing that I know people hate. They're like, this is why nerds run the sport. Look at the damn rule book. Look at I call this the Bryan magnitude test. Look at the magnitude of the things listed in that order, and that's how you attack the problem. Why are you focused on, Ben Simmons' three-point shooting when his free throw shooting matters more? Why are you focused on the offense? People are like, Ben Simmons' three-point shooting is hurting their offense. There's a very real problem that the 76ers offense has, which is turnovers, which both Ben Simmons and Embiid need to get under control. Focus on their turnovers. On the Nuggets defense, yeah, their defense is bad. Why are you worried about Nikola Jokic or Fareed when there's, Emmanuel Mudiay was getting tons of minutes and their defensive perimeter D was bad. I used the word D twice. So it's kind of like, in general, in sports, I get very maddened when it's kind of a visceral thing. People respond to things that they don't like more than things that actually pass a magnitude test. And when you actually have the ability to go why and drill down, I get extra annoyed. And with the Nuggets, that's pretty much where it goes. I'm like, there were problems you had that needed fixing. You didn't, and it's frustrating to see that because you didn't fix those problems, you're going to miss the playoffs again.
Yeah, and I think with young players, like Mitchell and Simmons, people are always thinking about what they're going to become, not what they are. So everyone's saying, Mitchell, maybe he's not shooting that well, but he's able to take all these shots somehow, and he's very skilled. He's definitely going to become an all-star, right, even if he's not showing it.
He very well might be, and I don't hate that, but it's like, I have a very
But we shouldn't be saying that right now.
Yeah, I have a very weird take on sports and the NBA, and actually, it probably applies even more to football when it comes to think about it. Baseball a little less, but there's an out that I might discuss there, and hockey too. So basically, I hate. This is going to sound weird, thinking about the future in basketball, and the reason is very simple. One, players' careers are short. You pretty much just have to pick your spots with players, and you have a limited thing. And we always argue you should always try and make the playoffs. That's kind of our mantra. So I hate the idea of this player may be great someday. My thought is always, how do we get a playoff team now that if we luck into a star as a young player, or if we luck into a star in the draft, not draft pick, that comes available via free agency or trade. I basically go for the opposite of the Kevin Pritchard treadmill of mediocrity point. My point is, get your ass on that treadmill of mediocrity and then get a really good pair of binoculars and be ever vigilant. That's my NBA strategy. So I hate thinking about the future. So when people are like, Donovan Mitchell could be good next year, I'm like, you guys have an MVP caliber player on your team. And that is that first off, we argue probably. Let's take a look. As mentioned, so
I think he had the most wins produced last year. Rudy Gobert, that is. I'm not sure, but that's what I remember.
There's two parts. So what we'll give here on air exclusive to the 10th to 20th of the people that actually follow us on Twitter, read the site. We've had some bugs that we're fixing out on the site, which I'm really proud. Patrick's done a lot of work to make the site both faster and more bug-free. Patrick and I have had a crazy last year where both of us have been busy, so I apologize for that. And then, as mentioned, I've just not really been doing much work on the coding end. But the good news is that we had a position adjustment issue that we're going to have to rerun, and so it might change things up a little last year, but you're not wrong. So with a possible bugs, that's the caveat I want to give. Rudy Gobert led the league in wins produced last season. I expect it'll be close to that. Now this season, if we go by wins per 48 and do the minute floor above 370 minutes, Rudy Gobert ranks 6th in the NBA. And the annoying out that I hate to throw to people is you might be able to kick Hassan White. Like if you believe Rudy Gobert is responsible for more of his team's defense than a few of these other players like Whiteside or Cantor, which I would have no complaint with, he's probably a little higher. So Rudy Gobert is probably a top 3, top 4 NBA player this season with a little wiggle room for defense, which I may or may not go on another tangent about defense. So you have an MVP caliber player, but here's the key. If we look at players in this, like, I'll call them 3 times as good, and maybe I'll go a little lower, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. There may be 20 players in this kind of what we'd consider MVP range. And that's just on per minute basis. Obviously, some of them, like Salah Mejri, right, very limited minutes. Some of these players, hate to do this to you, Steph Curry and Chris Paul have been out with injuries. So it's like you only have like 15 to 20 players that count as MVP caliber, and they have been a requirement to make it to an NBA Finals. Now, the 1-1 out, and this is like what you were talking a little bit about this last week, and it's not what you want to hope for, is you can have a Marcus Camby. I'm getting lots of good trope names, Brian. You can have a Marcus Camby butterfly, which is Marcus Camby is this player that's not really all that good, young. He was a high draft pick and looked good in college, but he's not good. And then he just decides in the 1999 playoffs, boom, I'm going to jump and turn into a star in the playoffs, which is rare. That does not normally happen. So you can pray that Donovan Mitchell turns into a star in the playoffs, but usually you want an MVP caliber player on your squad to have any shot at making a finals run or far in the playoffs. The Jazz have that. So I'm not a fan of, well, what about next year? What about the after? I'm like, get it this year. And, if you've got Donovan Mitchell and he looks great, that's fantastic. You know what you do? You get a veteran point guard in front of him. And to a degree, or shooting guard, he's played both. I've looked at the numbers. Basically, it looks like he's done kind of half and half, but he is primarily a shooting guard and plays next to Ricky Rubio. You get just a slight, you get an above average veteran shooting guard. You ramp up Donovan Mitchell slowly and you try and do as best you can this season. And then when Donovan Mitchell crosses that hump, then you play him full minutes. You always play for this season. I hate the idea of using essentially the NBA as your minor league team, because in other sports, and that was what I was going to say. So in the NBA, I hate thinking about the future. Same is kind of true in football, because in football, the average career span is 3 seasons. Now, funny counterpoint in football, by the way, and we'll have to talk this at some point, Brian, so I'll just leave it as a teaser and then we'll move on, is apparently in the NFL, revenue doesn't matter in terms of wins, meaning how well your team does not impact how much money your team makes. And so I have no idea how to feel about that. In terms of football, I don't know what to tell a front office. I mean, obviously as like a game, like as a board night game, do what you can to win. But in terms of running it as an office, I mean, that almost gives the implication that it's just like hire replacement level coaches, hire replacement level GMs, and maximize profit, I guess, because I have no idea what to say about that. In hockey and baseball, they have minor league squads, and usually even with top draft prospects, you'll use your minor league system to ramp them up as needed. And if they have problems in the pros, you send them back to the minors. The NBA is the one place where we're like, well, this guy isn't good yet, but he's looking good, and we'll ramp him up. I'm like, you never should. If you are a playoff team, you should never use a game to try and get development on a young player. I hate it. So that's really all I have there in terms of like that idea of, you should always go for it this season. So with the Nuggets, I absolutely and the Jazz. I absolutely hate next season maybe. It's like no, this season you got to go for this season.
Yeah, and the NBA is moving towards that. It seems we talked about this in recent shows that Adam Silver's moving towards getting rid of the one and dones, and I guess that means bringing high school players directly into a relationship with the NBA. So we'll see what happens with that, but. Yeah, I probably went a little too far with Donovan Mitchell just in terms of I think maybe people do think he's good now and they just it's just that little man bias, He's a guard, he's very skilled, he can score over big men. Everyone loves that. Everyone loves, who's going to be the next Allen Iverson, right? And I know he's not that small, but you know what I'm saying.
It bugs me to such a high degree that people do not realize that they have an inherent bias built into players that score a lot of points. And it bugs me in the field of advanced stats and that we haven't advanced because until there's a very real threshold that at least as the advanced stats community we have to get over before we can move on, in my opinion. And that is, it's a shocker, missed shots are bad. And it's funny too because Moneyball was very similar in that Moneyball, their big takeaway was there are a few, but basically they said getting on base is important. But their basic takeaway is outs are bad. You don't want players that get you out. You don't want to steal bases because that wastes outs. And their thought, rightfully so, and it's similar in the NBA, is you have a limited number of outs. You get 27 outs in a standard regulation Major League Baseball game. Those are valuable. That's a valuable thing. You don't want to waste them needlessly. You don't want to sack bunt, right, to just advance a runner. You're wasting it out. You don't want to steal a base. You're wasting it out. You don't want players that just swing away at everything when you can do a conversion math similar to like going for it on fourth down where you're like, yeah, 1 in 10 times he gets us a home run. That would be really good. Maybe, I don't know if 1 in 10. I don't know the ratio off the top of my head quick enough. 1 in X times they get a home run, but the other times they strike out. You can do a ratio and go, that's not worth it. In basketball, it's the same thing. Shots are a limited possession. You get 90 to 100 a game. They're valuable. You don't want to waste them. Now, there might be other nuances about different types of shots to take, or you have to take some. But I found all of the takes, and we can start looking at more of the data. I'll give a preemptive shout out. It's called pbpstats.com. I'll make sure to link it again at the end of the show. Fantastic site that uses an NBA.com scraper that scrapes over the play-by-play data and lists a bunch of stats, which are great. And so with stats.nba.com too, we're getting more and more of these stats that I like. If you look at it, basically shots on low shot clock or turnovers because of shot clock violations are super rare in the NBA. This idea that people have, it's always the narrative I hear when I talk about bad shots. Well, what happens when you run out of time and you scramble on the offense, someone has to take the shot. It's that's not a common scenario. And the good teams, right, are the ones that know how to maximize the good shots. There was this brief window in time with Mike D'Antoni, of all people, that the New York Knicks, I almost said New York Nets, the New York Knicks with Carmelo Anthony were shooting amazingly because they were just taking lots of threes and Melo was in on the game. You can maximize the type of shots you take. You can make good offenses. This idea of someone just has to take the shots is wrong. You're wasting a valuable possession. And it's kind of funny to be in the modern NBA, right? The teams that are succeeding are the ones that have realized take good shots. That's all I can say.
Yeah, and this is making me think of an Ian Levy article from recent weeks that I'm trying to dig up right now. Yeah, here we go. On Nylon Calculus, Offensive Style Changes, I think is the name of this article. And so we've talked about this a little bit, right? We pointed out in recent weeks that basically the Warriors are far ahead of the Rockets, or were a few weeks ago anyway, in terms of shooting efficiency, right? Effective field goal percentage. But the Rockets' offense is just as good per possession because they have a better shot chart, right? And this is what you like to call, Dre, the Maury Ball Index or something like that. What percent?
I call it the Bop the Clown, dude.
Okay. Well, whatever you want to call it. It's yeah.
The Clown knows this is from Bryan, and the reason is if you look at a heat map of what we would consider an ideal shot chart, there's a big red blob around the basket, and then a big red line around the three-point line, so it looks like a clown nose with a smiley face. And Bryan's yeah, you want to bop the clown nose. That's the ideal offense in the NBA.
So last week Ian Levy looked at offenses in terms of 4 things, right? You might have seen these before. It's I forget the name of this kind of chart, but He looks at ball movement, shot selection. That's what we were talking about, right? The BOP, the Con, the Maury ball index. And then the others are pace and player movement. And I'm assuming he's using player tracking data here. So if you look at this, the Warriors versus Rockets, and then the other three offenses he puts in there, which are good offenses, are Timberwolves, Raptors, and Cavaliers. Very different styles in those four areas, right? So even though the Rockets take these really amazing, have a great shot selection, right, and a great pace, they don't move the ball at all, and they take a ton of shots out of isolation. So some people on Twitter are thinking, well, even though they're taking good shots, they're not coming from ball movement, they're coming from isolation. Maybe the Rockets can't keep that shooting percentage up. And then the Warriors, it's the opposite, right? The shots, the location of the shots they take, they are worse than the Rockets. They take more mid-range jumpers. But because they always come out of ball movement, theoretically, they make a lot more, right? So really a lot of different ways to do offense that are effective. And the point of bringing this up is none of these teams are perfect, right? There's a lot, if you're working under Ian Levy's model here, there's a lot of ways for all these teams to improve.
Well, I mean, even for me, because Chris Paul is an example of a player where his shot chart does not look like what I'd want. You want to maximize points, right? You want to maximize points per possession. And so when we start talking about, teams that make mistakes and things they could do to improve, and like the Bop the Clownos, all we're basically saying is like, you should focus on that. And it's surprising that teams don't realize that. And then a lot of kind of the conventional wisdom goes against that. So it's kind of like, I'm of the opinion, DeMar DeRozan and Chris Paul are like two players that I'll give free range to take the shots they do because they're above league average at them. If you factor in like effective field goal percentage, you do what works. And yeah, so I think another thing. So we were talking this a little. I'll jump to the Warriors. Kind of. This isn't the first point I want to make about the Warriors, but it is a point I want to make about the Warriors. So I was talking with one of your boys, Samus Fondiari, about Ben Simmons of all people.
Fellow Warriors fan. I don't actually know him, just to be honest.
I assume that all of you Warriors fans in the Bay Area, you just all hang out together.
He has no idea who I am.
Like Ethan Strauss, I assume, just takes you all for drinks every day. That's the assumption in my head, right?
Oh, I'm ready for him to buy me some drinks. Yeah.
All right. So anyway, though, when it comes down to it, we were talking about Ben Simmons. He was like, Ben Simmons has a problem because he doesn't do this. In this case being take 3-point shots. And I was like, well, who gives a damn? Like, he does what works. Now, to the Warriors' point, we've had pundits like Charles Barkley and others that are like, the Warriors style will never win. And right, the MO was the Suns, right? The Suns were never able to win. No team has ever been able to win doing this D'Antoni like offense, right? And now we have the best two teams in the NBA are D'Antoni offenses. One of them run by none other than Mike D'Antoni. And so I always get bugged by this notion of you can't do this. Because it's like, well, just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean it can't be done. And the 3-point line has been in effect since 1980. And I'm going to preemptively give one of my shout-outs. So another shout-out I'm going to give, I might have any shout-outs to give by the end of the show, Bryan, is Magic Johnson. So a guy on my Twitter follow, on my Twitter feed, I believe B-Punk or B-Funk, so F, B-Funk, was pointing out to me Magic Johnson was actually really good at 3-point shooting in 1990. So this is what's nuts. I was noting, and this was not like a subtweet, but just an observation about Ben Simmons because of everybody bringing up his 3-point shooting, that it's really bizarre that people are just mad that every player isn't LeBron James in Miami. Because if you remember, LeBron James in that stretch of, 4 finals runs and 2 finals in Miami, here's a guy that can play every position 1 through 5. And he did that, right? If you recall, one playoffs, Chris Bosh went down with injury, and essentially LeBron James was playing the 5. He could shoot threes. His 3-point shot effect was amazing. He got, I think, second defensive player of the year one of those years. He was a great passer. LeBron James in Miami could do everything. Again, one of the reasons he's on my Mount Rushmore. This is going to sound mean against Michael Jordan, and it's a rough one, right? There is an inherent bias in the NBA towards big people, and it's weird that I think people just hate it, but it's just with how the stupid game is constructed. There is a hoop 10 feet off the ground on a short thing that requires going back and forth. This game is built to give an advantage to tall people. That's just like, it's kind of bizarre, and it's almost arbitrary, right? Because, there's a lot of men versus women in sports. And the reality is, if you look at sports, they arbitrarily are going to give advantages to people with certain criteria. There's a great book called The Sports Gene that talks about this. Now, we might not always know what that is, but, runners, for instance, it turns out height doesn't really help you out. There's like physics behind this. Height doesn't help you out on running, and it turns out having smaller feet is advantageous for running.
You mean for distance running? I think it does for sprinting.
I can't look it up fast enough. So
I'd be curious.
Someone chat. Okay, so let's just phrase it this way. I believe it might be both, but I might be mistaken, Bryan.
Okay, but sure.
It might be distance running, but in the book, The Sports Gene. So we'll try and include a show note. I'll forget. But
I'll just say that I'm biased because Usain Bolt, who just retired but was the greatest for 5 to 10 years, he's like 6'5", and there's a lot of tall sprinters, but you could be right.
Okay, but he was talking various advantages like feet size, because if you have a lighter foot, it makes it easier to lift it and do it repeatedly and stuff like this. So different advantages, and it's just basically arbitrary based on the criteria given. One example I've seen is, women figure skating or female gymnastics versus men's gymnastics. It just seems like, could be wrong, that what women are capable of doing because of, center of gravity, et cetera, seems more impressive than men. And so if that had taken off as the sport of choice, we'd be in a different field. So basketball's the same era. We made these rules, these arbitrary rules based on, and they're based on the fact that there was a track, right? The original, the Naismith basketball. The reason he came up with it is he hung a basket on a track that was around a gym, right? That's why it's off the thing. If he had done something if there hadn't been a track and there'd been something around the middle, maybe the hoop would be 5 feet off the ground and we'd have a different game. And here we are.
People It'd be like Powerball from American Gladiators then, Dre. You remember that sport? Awesome.
I do not. I never watched it.
Sorry, keep going.
In basketball, there's just an inherent advantage to bigs. We've kind of known this, and there hasn't really been a team that hasn't won with a dominant, at least, and the trick, this was also in the Sports Gene, is wingspan. So you might consider Dennis Rodman an undersized big. LeBron James certainly doesn't count. But if you look, like Charles Barkley and Dennis Rodman are fantastic bigs, and the reason is they have these long freaking arms. So essentially, you need someone that's either really tall or really, able to get their arm up really high and really mobile. So that's required for basketball. And unfortunately, when we look at Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, Michael Jordan, this is the exact same reason he was cut from his high school team, isn't able to play, was never able to play as a center. You could never use Michael Jordan as a center. It's not a dig against him, but one other advantage I'll give to LeBron James over Michael Jordan is LeBron James could play every position 1 through 5 with every skill set everybody's requiring, because what I was bringing up is I was like, most players couldn't do everything. Shaquille O'Neal is one of the most dominant bigs ever, but certainly you don't want him handling the ball, and certainly you don't want him taking threes. But B-Funk brought up, and if we look at 1990 for Magic Johnson, so this is what's incredible. If you look at Magic Johnson, in 1990, he actually upped the number of threes. So he started taking threes towards the end of his career. Throughout the beginning of his career, through 1988, he did not take 3 points. He took less than 1 3 a game. Then in 1989, he ups that to 2.4 a game, and he boosts his 3-point average. He had been shooting around 200% from 3. He boosts that to 31.4%. Then in 1990, he boosts it again to 38.4. Now it goes back to 32%. But there's a very real question if Magic Johnson wasn't realizing, I got to stop taking long twos. I got to start taking these threes. And then in 1996, when he comes back for that last season that he retires on, he actually shoots, now admittedly it's from the shortened three, 37.9% from the 3-point line. Now, of course, he only takes 1.8 threes a game, but that's because he had moved from a point guard to a power forward. So basically, Magic Johnson in 1990 and LeBron James are like the only two players that are perfect at everything. So it is always bizarre to me to see people kind of bash a player for not having everything. And I forget the very start of that, but yeah.
Yeah, and when that was a thing at the time, at least that are, however good my memory is from the late 80s, that first of all, Magic Johnson's 3-pointer was not a jump shot. It was actually a set shot that he learned. Similar to Jason Kidd picked up a set shot 3-pointer. Of course, Jason Kidd picked it up earlier, right? Because one of the weird stats is that he ended up being one of the all-time 3-point shooters and 3-pointers made. But yeah, I mean, that was, I think, I don't want to try to remember why this happened, but it could have been something like that, where it's like, hey, Magic Johnson, you're one of the best players. You're good at everything except threes. And he's like, challenge accepted. Let's go. And he started putting him in there.
Yeah, and so who knows what would have been if he'd kept going.
Exactly.
All right, so again, forgot where I'm going, but let's go back to the Warriors. So, what was the start of the Warriors? I cannot remember. I feel bad when I listen back. I'm gonna yell at me.
It's the Chernobyl Warriors.
Warriors. I thought I had a point before that about the Warriors that I started with. The three ball, the changing offense. Okay, so that was I can get back to it, Brian. So basically, the point being, the NBA has been around forever. The 3-point line's been in effect since 1980, but it took forever for teams to adapt. Now, admittedly, that was the question. Magic Johnson started adapting early. What could have been? But teams are only now starting to catch up on the 3-point line. So I really hate the notion of this strategy doesn't work. And in fact, I give Ian Levy a lot of credit for this. I got to tell him this in person at Sloan, which I was happy for. Says, in the annals of NBA advanced analytics, I think his work on expected points per shot is one of the most underrated things. I think Kirk Goldsberry got a lot. It's one of those Edison, Tesla kind of thing. Where
I see.
I think Kirk Goldsberry had a nicer infographic and got more credit at the time. But basically, those were two parallel thinking ideas, we can say, that were going on at the same time. And I think Ian's was slightly better. I liked it a little more.
HickoryHigh.com.
Hickory High. And I talked to him about that. Basically, I kind of like hearing this kind of stuff because when I talk about bugs in the position adjustment, which we might talk at the end, and issues with not keeping up, basically what he said happened is when he moved over, he's done a couple right now. I forget where he's at. I think he's at he's at something.
He's at Nylon Calculus. Yeah, that's where the article was.
Nylon Calculus and another one, too. There's another.
So Nylon Calculus is now a property of Fansided.
Fansided, thank you.
Fansided, I think, bought Nylon Calculus. I'm not sure.
Okay, so basically, though, when he moved to Nylon Calculus, they were going to.
Fansided. I think it's the same thing, yeah.
They were going to migrate. Well, I think I'm saying the move to Nylon Calculus. I think they were going to migrate his blog, Hickory High, which was one of the best ever. And basically, there was just a miscommunication over time, and the blog disappeared. And so, the thing makes me feel happy in the sense that I'm we're not the only ones that occasionally have technical glitches, but it is painful. For those of you that remember back in the day, in the beginning of advanced analytics on the net, Hickory High, one of the best sites out there, loved it. But even to expected points per shot, they've done research since, and it's you know what? The correlation between shot location and shooting efficiency isn't high up. That's what you were saying. What you're going to want to do as a team is you basically want to say, I want to maximize the shots that go in. Now, the easy thing, and this, I was looking over shot charts for this, though, is most players cannot shoot well enough from anywhere except the paint or three to make it worthwhile. So the only time you're going to want to take those shots, and I am fine with this, is when you're wide open. I think there is a misunderstanding of the NBA about players not being able to shoot, right? It's so tempting to say Rajon Rondo can't shoot. I've joked about this time and time again that Rajon Rondo shouldn't take a shot in the NBA. But Rajon Rondo has shot above 30% from three, close to 40% a few times, which is nuts. He's done that multiple times. And the very simple reality is if you got rid of all the defenders, if you got rid of him having to run, do a sprint in between shots, if you went and played a game of horse against Rajon Rondo, you would get your ass kicked. This was like the Brian Scalabrine challenge. I think it is way different to play an NBA game where you're running back and forth and you're covered by huge 6'7", 6'8" on average guys doing this with their hands and getting their hands in your face and lots of noise. There is a major difference between that and just shooting balls in the court on your own. Most NBA players can shoot, but the point being, in an NBA game, pretty much layups and threes are pretty much all you want to take. And so you want to maximize that, and this is a rougher one, open shots. So whatever you need to do to maximize it. So it's funny when people are like, well, this team does this and this team does that. It's yeah, do what works for your squad. You want to maximize getting the ball through the hoop, whatever you need to do that. And just saying with math, you can probably say, hey, look, most of you probably are not good enough to do this without layups or threes. Cut it out. That was our DeMar DeRozan point. Basically, it's look at, dude, you're not good enough at those mid-range shots to make it worthwhile in the aggregate. You got to cut out 10% of those and start taking those from three. He did that, and we think he's a star as a result.
Yeah, that was really interesting that you figured that out. So do you want to go through that Black Swan Chernobyl stuff for the Warriors, or go on to Daniel Bryan?
Were you talking to me, or were you mocking DeMar DeRozan there? Were you like, wow, DeMar DeRozan, you figured out threes were good?
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. Those are two different ideas.
Bryan just being a hater. Okay, so the Chernobyl Warriors. So this was a little sad, Bryan. You guys helped keep the Spurs in the playoffs, which as a Nuggets fan, I love hate. It's kind of a weird one where if the Nuggets, I'm there's so many good. I love Gary Harris. I love Nikola Jokic. I'm impressed by Jamal Murray. I'm impressed by Will Barton. I love Mason Plumlee. I'm loving what Trey Lyles is doing, but I kind of don't want him to make the playoffs. It's kind of like the punishment thing. I'm like, you don't deserve the playoffs.
You want Mike Malone to get fired, huh?
I love Mike Malone. I was tweeting this out too. It's like, I can't believe. One of my bread and butters was insulting George Karl, and George Karl was actually pretty good at running offenses. He was just bad at picking the players to play. I hate to say it, with this lineup, with this roster, George Karl would be playing the right players and they'd be doing well. So it's painful. Okay, but the Warriors lost to the Spurs in a game that helped keep the Spurs in the playoffs, and as a result, it's going to help keep the Nuggets out. But there's a very simple reason. Steph Curry. Do you know what Steph Curry's injury is?
Yeah, it's an ankle. He's supposed to be back on Friday.
Okay, so Steph Curry is out with an ankle. What's Kevin Durant out with?
God, they have so many different injuries. It might be ribs, or maybe Draymond Green is ribs. Basically, their whole team is hurt, Dre. That's the simplest way to put it.
Steph Curry is out with his ankle. I'm going to look up Kevin Durant.
Let's go to Basketball Reference here.
Okay, so it's rib. So Kevin Durant's out with a rib.
It is ribs, okay.
Do we know the status on Klay Thompson? Is he going to be back for the season? Because I know he hurt his hand.
He's out for a few weeks. I don't know how much longer is in the season, actually.
Yeah, well, there's not much time left in the season. So,
all right, so do you want the official Basketball Reference injury report here?
Yes.
Omri Caspi missed the past 2 games with a sprained right ankle. Undetermined if he will play Friday. Stephen Curry, we already talked about him. He's supposed to be back Friday. Kevin Durant, rib fracture. Sidelined 2 weeks as of the 15th. So, yeah, he's not going to be back until April. Draymond Green, groin, actually came back already. Unknown if he will suit up against the Hawks on Friday, though. And then Klay Thompson broke his right thumb, out until at least the end of March.
Okay. So I called this the Chernobyl Golden State Warriors. The reason being, and I believe this is Nassim Taleb in one of his books, The Black Swan. We were talking about this pre-show. The idea of a black swan is kind of a super rare, unexpected event with catastrophic, usually, so the way it's commonly used is with catastrophic consequences. The way Taleb uses it a lot, because he was a trader, is to talk about a lot of people that make,
you mean a stock trader, right? Not Traitor trader.
He's not a trader. He's a stock trader, or was. And so the point being, a lot of people make models in the real world, and they have a risk analysis. And this was like The Big Short, if you've seen that, about the housing crisis in the United States. Basically, they put in like a floor for the odds that, this many people will foreclose, or the odds that this will happen. And Taleb's point is these ultra rare events that could basically wreck the system are more common than people want to believe. The reason he calls it a black swan is like all swans are white until you travel to, I think, Australia or somewhere, and you see the one black swan, and you're like, oh crap, I thought the odds were close to impossible. I thought all swans were white. One swan drastically changes those odds. So a black swan event are these ultra rare events that can happen, and we often are prone to underestimating the likelihood. And an event that I believe he mentions, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but it's kind of gelling in my head, I believe, but if I got it from another location, I'm not going to be able to remember where, but was Chernobyl. So Chernobyl was this nuclear meltdown that I believe, interestingly enough, I think what's kind of frustrating about nuclear disasters, nuclear reactor disasters and stuff is the casualties in them are really low, but we have a very visceral reaction to them, where it's like more people, I guarantee you, have died in coal mining accidents than like nuclear reaction accidents, but we're more prone, probably because of the atomic bomb as well. Too much to speculate. But Chernobyl, nuclear reactor that melts down. There's a major problem as a result. But if you go back in time, we view this as this horrible accident and negligence, whatever. There were 5 or 6 safeguards that all had to fail. I might try and look up Chernobyl in the background on Wikipedia while I'm talking. And the reason I call the Warriors the same way is when we were talking this last week. The Warriors at the beginning of the season, everybody's they're too good for the NBA. You might as well tank because you're not going to compete with the Warriors. How dare they sign Kevin Durant? And all of this amused me first off because, right, the 73-win Warriors already had I'll call it a mini Chernobyl, where Steph Curry got injured and slipped on some, I think he I'm forgetting the order here. He got injured and slipped on some sweat, or did he slip on some sweat and got injured and as a result and then re-injured himself later in the playoffs?
Now, the slipping on the sweat play was the play that took him out.
Okay. So he slipped on some sweat and got injured and then was playing. They were saying he wasn't full health and he like re-injured himself. So he wasn't 100% in the finals. Draymond Green, because he got into some technical foul trouble, got suspended for a game in the finals. Andrew Bogut, I think got injured in game 3 or game 4 and missed the rest of the finals. The Warriors already had multiple players miss key times in the season to cost them a title. And so this season, though, the Warriors, right, that is an absurd number of injuries that we've just listed down, right? That is 4 of their starters that all missed a game with injury that, they lost an 8-point game to the Spurs as a result.
One more injury thing, Dre. Kevin Love was healthy for the Cavaliers that season. He was not the season before when the Cavaliers lost to the Warriors, and all the Warriors guys were healthy.
So with Chernobyl, though, same point. There were lots of things. There were lots of safeguards in place, and they all had to go wrong for this meltdown to happen. And so I find it amusing just in sports, and you said you liked it because I kind of crystallized your point, which is it's so much easier for things to go wrong in NBA seasons than people think, which is why we're like, I'll take every star you can get on your squad, barring affordability, right? You already have an MVP, hell, get 2 MVPs. You already have a finals MVP, hell, I'll get another finals MVP, because there's no guarantee a player is going to be healthy. And in these risk models, that was the whole point in the Black Swan by Taleb, is all these analysts with their risk models that just vastly underrated the risk that, all these people would foreclose on their house, or there have been other market crashes as well that had similar risk problems. The NBA is the same way. There are these people that believe there is no conceivable way that 3 of your stars are going to go down injured in an NBA season. And that can happen, and that has happened to the Warriors. We will see if they're able to we'll see if they're able to shack this, basically meaning Shaquille O'Neal on the Los Angeles Lakers. Phil Jackson's idea was, I just need this guy healthy for the playoffs. I want to get 60 regular season games, then I want him healthy going into the playoffs. So if the Warriors can get all of their guys healthy into the playoffs, they are a force to be reckoned with. But right now, it's not looking so good.
Yeah, that's right. And I want to make the same point about the Warriors that you did about the Spurs last week, which is that, and I said basically if Kawhi Leonard comes back, the Spurs have had some good play from other players, they have a chance. However, we don't know that. Even if Leonard comes back, we don't know if he's going to ramp up to being his old self anytime soon. The Warriors could have a similar issue if Durant and Curry miss some more time, right? We don't know.
Durant at the start of the season looked pretty awful, and he'd had some injury. And
Durant's missed time 2 separate times during the season.
Yeah, and Curry in that finals, right, did not look like himself. So it's not. It is not an unreasonable observation to say that it is entirely possible that Durant, Curry, Clay do not come back from their injuries and play immediately even close to 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing that's so tough about it is, people just lock in whatever they think at the beginning of the season, and there's this idea that that's it. Like, you have to ride it out, and if you switch your opinion, then you ride the fence, you're a waffler or whatever. Like, that's just like the tribal sports fan way to think about it, right? We're talking about the scientific way, the Bayesian way. You have to take account new evidence, right? So
I'll throw back. You and I kind of workshopped this piece on the air, and then I wrote it. I called it the Charles Babbage basketball prediction problem. I just noted I don't give a damn what you said about the NBA at the start of the season at this point. I'm sorry, because in this article, and I'm sure it might have even gone up since then. Did I list the Warriors in this article? I might not have. I didn't list the Warriors, so obviously that's different too. I went over 19 teams in this article, so I'm missing the Warriors too, where I just said here are major differences this season in the NBA.
Oh, right.
Differences to 19 teams. And this was on nerdnumbers.com. And I basically, things like the Celtics losing Gordon Hayward or the Pelicans losing DeMarcus Cousins, major changes that meant whatever you thought at the beginning of the season, if you're realistic, you would say, I would not have had the same opinion of this season had you told me that at the beginning of the season. And if that's the case, then you have to, that is the Bayesian model, right? After every NBA game, you should update what you think the likely outcome is. And that's just kind of tie everything together to tanking. It's why we don't think tanking is a good idea ever at the start of the season. You always have a chance. But why we don't think, I'll call it throwing in the towel, every team reaches a point that isn't going to make the playoffs. Every team reaches a point in the season where it is obvious they aren't going to make the playoffs. Now, for a few, this has happened, right? That's the very last game of the season, right? I need to win this game against this team, and another team needs to lose. And if that happens, I make the playoffs, right? Those are exciting, and we love those. But for most teams, right, for most teams, it's been answered. If the Spurs hadn't done what they've done in the last couple of weeks, they might know they are out. And we can't tell them, hey, go ahead and tank at this point, right? Move up 3 spots in the draft. What else are you going to do? And in fact, one thing I've thought about tanking that bugs the hell out of me is I think the correct model for tanking is to start bringing in younger players. Go to the G League, go overseas, give player 10-day contracts, and start doing I just said don't use the regular season as a minor league system. If you're out of the playoffs, go for it. Why not? And the issue the NBA has right now is that, in my opinion, they have no real way of saying you shouldn't do that beyond telling you we're going to fine you. And I might be in the case, right? If I'm a team, for instance, like the Chicago Bulls, and I've got some decent players, I've got Bobby Portis and Lauri Markkanen, for instance. And Lauri Markkanen isn't a good NBA player, but is a promising young player. Same situation as Donovan Mitchell, right? I don't want to give him the reins, but I want to, I want it to be part of my future. Maybe I rest Lauri Markkanen and I go, we're paying this guy millions of dollars a year and we expect him to be our future. Why am I going to risk him in games that don't matter? You want to fine me $15,000 a game or whatever, freaking go for it. But I'll take that cost. And in fact, I've kind of been laughing about the Lakers and their fines for basically courting Paul George and courting Matt. There was a funny rumor. So the Lakers beat the Cleveland Cavaliers a week or two ago. And in that game, I guess Magic Johnson was talking to LeBron James' representative. I wouldn't be shocked if he got fined. I don't think he will, but I wouldn't be shocked if he got fined for that. But it's like, if you're trying to court a $20 to $30 million a year star, and you get fined $15,000 to $100,000 for going over the line, but you get that star, who gives a damn? Another kind of weird tangent on that note. There was just a clickbaity headline about LeBron James I saw over the Twitter feed. It was like LeBron James invests over $1 million a year in his body. And I was kind of like, well, this is a guy that when you factor in endorsements is probably worth between $30 and $50 million a year. That is not a lot of his money to be investing. That's the same. If you had a software engineer making $100,000 a year, if every year they buy every year they buy themselves a $5,000 computer, it's a similar thing. And if they're trying to stay state of the art, cutting edge, that might make sense. So it's kind of like, it's really funny to see these kind of ticky-tack things where if you actually, I always call it the Bryan magnitude test, if you actually analyze it and go, I will take a $15,000 a game hit to keep my future player from getting injured in a season that is now over, where I actually get a marginally, that's our point, marginally, but a marginally better asset for doing so.
Yeah, and just the last thing on Golden State is you mentioned they were not one of the 19 teams you include in your article. And I'm guessing that's because you wrote about 3 weeks ago when they didn't have anyone injured and they were the number 1 seed riding high and everyone knew they were going to win the championship, right? Like it was a foregone conclusion. Here we are 3 weeks later before the playoffs even, and they're locked into the number 2 seed. In fact, Draymond Green admitted to a reporter, yeah, we're going to be the number 2 seed. That's why we're not trying to win right now or something. He didn't quite say that way, but you know what I mean. Like Draymond Green conceded the number 1 seed, basically. And Arturo's model says it's like 99%, so maybe Draymond Green is right.
Maybe Draymond Green's like, just do the math. Like, why wouldn't you, what he's like, I can do math. Why can't you? Okay. So let's talk about Dave Barry. This is actually two posts ago, but that's nice. It's probably one of his, see how red it is. This is an interesting observation I've had about the internet. I'm going to go back to Cracked, rest in peace, Cracked, one of my favorite sites. Holy cow. All right. Well, good. This is good news. All right. So Dave Barry wrote a piece called Let's Talk About What's Truly Wrong with Women's College Basketball. To date, it's his most read piece. I think it trumps all of his other pieces put together. According to Forbes, it has 126,000 views. For perspective, his pieces about Derrick Rose and like the Wisconsin Badgers, 20,000 hits on his Derrick Rose piece on the Timberwolves, 8,000 piece on his Wisconsin Badgers. You people care more about Derrick Rose than Wisconsin Badgers hockey. What's wrong with you? All right. So anyway, he talks about women's college basketball and the University of Connecticut. The Huskies, fantastic. Up there. I don't know if I had to vote the Golden Retrievers versus the Huskies. I don't know who I'd go with in my bracket, Brian. That'd just be a tough.
Well,
tough
I think
call.
I saw that the UConn women beat Quinnipiac, known for their political polling, who was the 9th seed in the last round. So maybe they haven't hit the heavyweights yet. But yeah, go ahead, Trey.
No, I'm just joking. If we're doing this, I've heard there have been like jokes about like perfect brackets, and their kid filled it out, and their kid was just like decided what animal would win in the contest, right? So they're
I like it.
They're like, well, clearly a bull would be to this or whatever. So I'm saying if I had to choose Husky versus Golden Retriever, that's a tough choice. I don't know which one I pick. But University of Connecticut, the Huskies. It was funny. I thought of the Mighty Ducks when I was looking at a picture because they had all the banners of their wins in a row, and I think they have like 2000 and like 2002. If you remember the Mighty Ducks, like the Hawks coach is like, I wish they'd take that banner down like a runner-up year. I was thinking about the same thing with the Connecticut because they've just been dominant. I forget their win streak. I forget their title record. They're one of the most well-known teams in college basketball at this point. I was making fun of Obama to a friend. I was like, really going out on a limb there, picking Connecticut to win it all, which is what he picked in his bracket. Now, a stupid argument we'll hear is that it is bad for college sports and bad for women's sports that they are so dominant. It's the same stupid parody argument we've heard forever in sports, but this just doesn't turn out to be true. And what I liked that Dave brought up is, first off, he compared them to the UCLA Bruins. Is that right?
Yes, UCLA Bruins men from 1964 to 1975 have a ridiculous winning streak in college.
And that was at least the two names I know for sure, right? That was Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor at the time.
Yeah, there's like probably dozens of NBA All-Stars that played for those teams. They were really dominant.
I'm gonna have to look at it, but in terms of that, he basically was like, "Hey, this." If you look at the 70s, there was this team that just crushed college men's basketball. And did college men's basketball die? Of course not. It got, if we've looked at it since then, it only grew in popularity. His counter argument is the problem with women's sports popularity isn't that there's just one dominant squad. In fact, I would argue that's probably a good thing. I speculated to Dave. I said, I noticed he was getting a lot of retweets and likes for this. I said, you tweeted about other things, as an example, about the Wisconsin Badgers. And it didn't get as much traction, but people know the University of Connecticut. My point about the NBA is, despite us having an MVP caliber player in Giannis Antetokounmpo, it does really turn out that more people out here, I see more people walking around in Warriors jerseys because they know who the Warriors are. This is so annoying. You don't have the college. Oh, okay, there we go. All right, so I was trying to subtly look up UCLA in the background as I was talking. But the point being, dominant squads are good for the popularity. And I was talking to Dave about this. I've talked to you about this on the show. In individual sports, we recognize this. We recognize this easily. There have been thought pieces like, what are we going to do when Tiger Woods retires? What's going to happen to men's tennis in the United States when, Agassi and Sampras are done? That was back in the day. Same question with like Federer and Nadal. These matchups between heavyweights, the wrestling comparison I always bring back to is, Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant in the 1980s built the WWE, WWF at the time. In individual sports, people recognize the value of a superstar that dominates. And then in team sports, we suddenly act like it's bad, even though, let's point this out, the stupid New England Patriots are probably the most popular football team. The New York Yankees are insanely popular. The Golden State Warriors are insanely popular. Having a super popular team is not bad for a team sport that's just kind of stuff put on. Dave Barry's counter is maybe it's the fact that women's sports aren't just reported on as much. And that this is true. If we break down the numbers, and one of the saddest observations I think was made, I don't know if it was by Dave or someone else like a year ago, ESPN, I think I'm getting this right, was more likely to report on animal sports than women's sports.
Yeah, he's got a link there. Let's see what that article is. Oh, he links to his own article from Forbes last November. So, yeah, there you go.
Okay. And by the way, holy cow, Mark Eaton went to UCLA as well. This is just stupid. Okay.
No, that's a crazy list. If you start looking down that draft, I don't even want to start.
I'm wasting time right now looking at it. But his point is, well, the problem with women's sports popularity isn't that there aren't good squads. It's not that there aren't good things to watch. It's that the power brokers, the ESPNs, the other networks that can cover this, just refuse to cover it. They don't even cover it close to it. And, he's pointed out, you can break down by women versus men in terms of athletes. And then another point that we'd say is, well, the men's sports are more popular. Well, Dave pointed out too, another observation I absolutely loved is we subsidize men's sports all the time. This is one of our biggest complaints about stadiums. Most stadiums are paid with tax dollars. So it's like all of the male sports that people are like, oh, well, they're super popular. It's not a meritocracy. They get government money. They get subsidized. So it's like if we just even boosted women's sports a little, and it seems frustrating in the sense that if you look at it from a money-making perspective, you're just leaving half of your population off the table kind of needlessly. Even if you view it as another way, which is like watching successful sports teams, I believe is more likely to make you try a sport. I think that's just like, I think if you follow the data, right, like a championship squad on a team means the odds that you'll go try out like junior league hockey or whatever goes up. And this was, for instance, why it was really good that Wayne Gretzky went to the Los Angeles Kings from Edmonton. It's probably sad that he left the Edmonton Oilers, left Canada, but he went to Los Angeles, and that really, really helped improve interest in hockey because you have a state where you wouldn't normally have people play hockey interested in playing hockey.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just good all around. It's funny to use the stupid term like trickle down effects, right? Like,
God,
having good coverage of a sport can help breed demand in both playing and viewing that sport. And the fact that they just kind of like don't want to. And this last year for movies with like Wonder Woman and then now Black Panther, it was fascinating. And then Coco was fantastic. One of the best movies I've ever seen. It's like you have these groups that don't normally get to lead in movies, and they lead and the movie does amazing. And it's like, you're just leaving money on the table. So I love that article from Dave. I'm happy all of the, the credit and attention it's got. And then I want to use this as an excuse to bring back something from the Paul Shirley and Justin Halpert Short Corner podcast called the segment called Fuck That Guy, where they would kind of go and just like say, fuck that guy to someone over the week that sometimes either did something that upset them. In some cases, there are other reasons, but this case is I'm upset with this. So Jason Lisk, and that's all I'm going to give you. You can look him up if you want.
He's a journalist. That's all I'll say.
Sure. I question that. Like, I mean, he's a journalist in the same way that Donovan Mitchell is an above average NBA player. But Jason Lisk penned a 700-word response to Dave Barry's piece saying, you know what? Maybe people just don't care about women's sports. Now, what I pointed out, I subtweeted him on Twitter today. I said, if you write a 700-word piece about how nobody cares about something, then at least one person cares, and that person is you. Sorry. Now, the good news, kind of, is, this got a lot of ire, and one of the people that came about was Jessica Luther, who is just, as a journalist, one of the heavyweights. She has broken some of the biggest stories, has the book Unsportsmanlike Contact. Fantastic. Go listen to the is it Burn It All Down? I was leaving that out. I think it's
I think it's Burn It All Down. It might just be Burn It Down, but yeah.
It's the Burn It All Down podcast. I just want to make sure I get the title correct. Yes, cool. Because I think I've said it Burn It Down before. Left the all. That's on my RSS feed. It's fantastic stuff.
We're not just burning some stuff, Dre.
Yeah, we're burning it not just a little. We're burning it all down. That's what they do on that podcast.
The way they do that segment's really funny too. I definitely recommend that podcast.
And I love that. Yeah. It's the heavyweight, and so she came out and said, I think just made a comment about how annoying that was or whatever, and he responded to you, "Are you part of the media?" And then tried to shame her, which was just ridiculous, by saying she's tweeted 3 times about UConn than she has all year, which bullshit. He went over her tweets. I don't buy it. She tweets too much. I can't keep up with all of Jessica Luther's great tweets. And I'm a fan. It became very obvious that he didn't know who she was because, and this is what I tweeted out. 2 tweets later, he says, Jessica is very good at sports reporting and done great work on the Mavericks piece on Baylor and so many others. I'm not attacking her bona fides. She has a much bigger platform than I. It's very clear he thought Jessica Luther, because she explained on our show actually that she's temporarily lost her blue check mark because Nazis suck. Basically, she changed her Twitter handle because it used to be SC. It was like a Austin-based thing like SCAT Sports or whatever. or Scat Texas.
I want to say it was SCTAX.
Not Scat. Okay, so SCTX Sports or whatever. And she changed it to actually be her name. But because she changed that, she lost the blue check mark. And then because so many basically Nazis were abusing the platform to try and get verified, they temporarily shut down their verification process. So she has to wait to be verified again. It's clear he didn't know who she was called on it, Googled her, and then did the listed the. I've heard this kind of funny note on celebrities that get interviewed, where it's very clear they're being interviewed by a host that doesn't know them. And you can tell that they've just looked them up on Wikipedia because they list the first 5 things on Wikipedia. So yeah, fuck that guy for saying no one cares about women's sports, for trying to take on Jessica Luther, which, good luck to anybody that tries that. She is a heavyweight in the journalism field. She will kick your ass on sports talk. Just, it was amusing to watch that, I'll say.
People are just lazy on social media. That's my summary of this whole incident. People are very, very lazy, including this guy, Jason Lisk.
But I will say it's just worth noting, this is Dave Barry's most popular piece on Forbes. So the funny, and Dave Barry has been around writing forever. There is clearly a demand, and I'm hoping it will start to get met. It is so frustrating to see old gatekeepers saying, and I always hate this, I don't care, so other people don't care. To trivialize this entirely, Bryan, and bring it back to a topic we've talked on the show before. I'm a big Pokemon Go fan. I still play Pokemon Go. I actually really love Pokemon Go for video games because if you look at the demographics of the people I play with, it looks more like a potluck, like a church potluck, than it looks like if you look at a lot of video games like the first-person shooters, a lot of young, angry white men. So I love Pokemon Go for that. What I'll say, though, is, I see lots of pieces. Is it dying? Is it dead? Because it's not as popular. It's just because you no longer care about it doesn't mean a bunch of people still don't care about it. And the same is true with women's sports. Just because you don't care about women's sports doesn't mean other people do. And that's, in theory, if you're in the broadcasting game, that is your model. Your model isn't, I want to make a station of things I want to see. Your model should be, I want to make a station of things that lots of people want to see, so they will watch and give me money for that.
I'll disagree a little, though, just because it's Twitter specifically. And what I mean by that is I'm assuming that all of his followers are people that or for the most part, like and dislike the same things he does. So it makes sense for him to just go around trashing whatever he doesn't like, even if he's wrong. All of his followers are going to love it then and retweet it,
So we're in a similar boat, and I've wrestled with this a lot. And actually what I'll say is I'm just bad at capitalizing on it because I find, I find Donovan Mitchell's an easy one. And if I wanted to get likes and views and whatever.
3 Mitchell articles a week.
That's what I should have. I mean, I got a lot of heat. If we're going to use wrestling terms, we'll end with Daniel Bryan.
Oh,
we're not
good.
King of Kong. Maybe it's a good off-season topic, and I'll have more. I'm doing a little research on my own there.
Ooh.
But I was going to say I got white hot heat from that. I got a like. If I'd been on my game, I would have posted a Donovan Mitchell piece the next day. Dave Barry has in fact noted that to me at Forbes, where they will say, "This is news. Can you get something quickly up?" If you want to grow your following and grow your brand, that's what you have to do. Now, the advantage I have versus Dave is this is a hobby for me, and I'm always in that funny realm of how much more effort do I want to put in this to go to the next level? We as a group have hit a certain level, and there are, as you know, Bryan, projects on the back burner that I think would help to the next level, but that takes work, and there's always just going to be a trade-off. So when you're talking about his followers will like that is true, but that's the question any producer has to ask themselves. Do I just want the same people that already follow me to keep telling me they like what I'm doing, or do I want to grow my brand? And it's very apparent, especially since he went into Jessica Luther, who has more followers than he does, that there is a group outside of him that likes it. So it's always a question as a creator. And in some cases, I can't fault it. So for instance, and with this and then get to wrestling, Kevin Smith is a person I like. I love a lot of his content. By the way, I don't know if we gave him a shout out for this. He had a heart attack a few weeks ago.
He did. Yeah, he did.
All the best to him. I'm so glad he made it through that. I just couldn't have, we've had so many deaths and such a bad year. I'm like, you can't do I hate to do this to be selfish, and I am, and I doubt Kevin Smith watches the show, but if he does, Kevin Smith and Carrie Fisher aren't allowed to die in the same year. That's against the rules. I'm sorry. They're not. So thank you, Kevin Smith, for listening to the rules. All the best. I hope he gets better.
Well, that's what he said. He had to do 2 shows on the same night or something. He wasn't feeling good after the first show. decided to go to the hospital, and that was the difference.
Yeah,
if he had decided to do that second show, it might have gone differently.
Yeah, and I love his ability to do this. Like, he is a fantastic storyteller. He was talking about how he's in the doctor's office and they're trying to like take off his shirt, and it's like all of the doctors realize like this guy is this close to death, and they're like they realize that Kevin Smith doesn't realize the brevity of the gravity of the situation, because he's like, don't take off my shirt, I don't want to do that, I don't want you to see me naked. And it's like, you understand you're gonna die if we don't do surgery now, you're gonna die. So he tells it like, I realize me saying that, I'm like mortified hearing that out loud. He's a fantastic storyteller, does a good job. But I've heard people complain that Kevin Smith, if you look at his early creations versus later, his later creations just don't please as many people, and he might be just doing it for his fans. And I've heard that as a complaint. That being said, he can make a living at that. And I can't fault him for that, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, if you just want to get adulation from the 10,000 people that already like you, and in his case, millions, I don't necessarily know if I have a fault with that. But in the realm, so the final, nail in the coffin I'll give to this guy though, is if he's talking about popularity and he's got a very set cap thing of popularity, if he's saying, I just want these 6,000 people that like what I say already to keep liking what I'm saying, I hate to tell you, more people than that like women's sports.
And that's the trap of Twitter, right? That feedback loop. And we could get into politics and all that, but let's move on.
So in terms of booking and wrestling, I'm super conflicted on this, and we don't have a ton of time. We've been going like an hour and a half. I don't know if I like or hate that, Brian. We'll see what I think about that as a show length. But Daniel Bryan was trending on Twitter today because Daniel Bryan has been cleared to go back to wrestle in the NBA. Now, it's a fascinating kind of loop because one of the big names in the CTE group is Dr. Maroon, who does, I believe, work with I forget the full name, but like the Boston group that does CTE research. He's the WWE's guy, and he did not clear Daniel Bryan to wrestle. And Daniel Bryan, for those of you that don't know, that just for basketball, was one of the biggest indie name wrestlers out there. With CM Punk, he joined the WWE and kind of became a crowd favorite. And despite poor booking, kind of got put over on his own just because he was too damn popular. So he's one of this huge name that got over big in the WWE, but then has had lots of concussion issues. I guess has like memory issues. I guess one of the issues he's talked about is like not having feeling in one of his arms. So
one of his signature moves is a headbutt, right? So we kind of expect this.
God. All right, geez. And so a WWE doctor said he's not cleared to wrestle. And he has just been really fighting against this really hard, and he finally got cleared. I am super conflicted on this because I don't know if it's the Chris Bosh issue. Yeah. I don't know. I normally hate the paternalism of sports. In that, you have to play on this team because we told you so. You have to resign with this team because we tell you so, et cetera. How dare you try and do this? We tell you so. The WWE is however bad the NBA is at that kind of stuff, the WWE is worse. And then also the WWE, depending on if they ever get a nice class action suit, might have a case against it because they have contractors. Like, all of the wrestlers are officially contractors. They do this so they don't have to give them health insurance and stuff. I would argue the WWE wrestlers could all say it is illegal that you are using us as contractors, given the non-compete and non-coverage you give us and how much we work. That being said, all of the paternalism gets even worse in the WWE. But this is a case where I can kind of go, they might be right to say he shouldn't wrestle because God forbid anything happens to him. So I am definitely worried about him. A lot of the wrestlers, it's an interesting point because, for instance, it's easy to like a lot of wrestlers that I didn't really realize were as good as they were until after the fact. So Mick Foley, I bring him up every couple of shows. It's a lot easier to go, I'm really impressed by all the stuff this guy did, and I can watch him. And I didn't know at the time that I saw him when I was younger that these things were bad for him. But now in hindsight, realizing they're bad, you're in an interesting position. So then the question becomes, if I had known how bad concussions were, or chair shots and hits to the head were, in the 90s and 2000s when Mick Foley was wrestling heavily, would I have wanted him to stop? And so now we're in that exact same position with Daniel Bryan, where I'm going, we know all of this stuff is bad, and he wants to go back to it. Is that a good thing? And then on the exact opposite flip side, and I did this on Twitter, you can so just to make sure I don't get in trouble, like there was a New York Times author who was talking about the joys of unplugging from technology, and then people looked over his Twitter feed and were like, it's really odd that you unplug from Twitter for 2 weeks, but you're tweeting during those 2 weeks. So lest people accuse me rightly of being a hypocrite, the first thing I started doing was tweeting to Arturo about like who I think Daniel Bryan should wrestle against.
Arturo has some good answers to this, by the way.
There's some great answers. Everybody. I mean, he was trending on Twitter worldwide today, so it's not surprising. I'm conflicted. At the same time, I want to see it, and we've talked about this trap of being a sports fan, where you enjoy the activity, and all of these activities come with so much baggage in terms of worker exploitation, taxpayer exploitation, problematic histories, etc. And I think Daniel Bryan crystallizes this, but did want to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so out of all those booking options, I'll get to this first. This is the important one.
Okay.
I do agree with the notion. I don't remember if this came from you or Arturo, but him being Braun Strowman's tag team partner at WrestleMania, that would be a great return. I would love to see that. And then I think Arturo said leading into a feud with The Miz later. That might be a good way to do it.
I The Miz, because for those of you that don't know, we'll end on this. The Miz, like Daniel Bryan, was basically, this was part of the reason it was easier not to feel bad about the not NBA, the WWE not letting him wrestle. They basically gave him a sideline commentary job and kept him under contract, so he's still getting paid.
He didn't lose any money.
The same issue as Chris Bosh. Chris Bosh was still making money. Now, maybe losing some merch, like there's a lot of weird with how.
And you could also say it maybe hurts your brand to be sidelined, even if you're still making money.
There are issues with how the WWE pays its workers that if I was in charge of their like labor union, which they don't have because they're all contract employees, I would fix. But regardless, they were still paying him, so that made it a lot easier. He was doing an interview with The Miz, and basically The Miz, the point he made is he said that Daniel Bryan wrestled unsafely, and that's why he was retired and why The Miz could still wrestle. And wrestling is so weird because you have someone playing a character, but that character is really them, and the more successful wrestlers are the ones that like they're, The Rock is The Rock. Steve Austin is Steve Austin. Like they're like, I'm playing a character. Like, who's your character? Like, well, it's me, but except I beat up people on a weekly basis. And so a lot of part of that is like the WWE, this is so weird. I would never want to be a pro wrestler for this. A lot of times they incorporate real world stories in wrestling. So an example was Edge, Lita, and Matt Hardy, I believe. Was Matt right? I always get Matt and Jeff confused. Might have been Jeff. Matt or Jeff. One of the Hardy brothers. They ended up in a love triangle, basically, where in real life, one of the Hardy brothers was dating Lita in real life. And then she started having an affair with Edge in real life. And the WWE is like, you know what we should do for a storyline? We should have the Hardy brothers and Edge fight because of Lita. And so that's got to be really weird where you're on stage with scripted lines about someone cheating on you, et cetera, and fighting the person that's cheating on him with, but it's an act, but it's based on real life. So The Miz did that to Daniel Bryan. That was real. And so it actually got Daniel Bryan really upset. And so in wrestling, sometimes the most popular storylines are the ones that are rooted in reality, but fictitious. So I think The Miz versus Daniel Bryan for that would be huge. But there are lots of big names trending. If you're a wrestling fan, this is huge news, but at least be aware of the baggage attached to it.
Yeah, I'll try to be Bayesian like we were talking about throughout the show. When he first retired, I was like, yeah, he does all these headbutts. Of course he should retire. He's in his mid-30s. Then it was being reported that he was cleared by all these independent doctors, but not WWE. And then I'm like, I'm not so sure. Now that all the doctors on both sides, independent and WWE, have all cleared him, like, all right, let's give it a try. But if he gets another headbutt, maybe he should retire again, Or sorry, another concussion, not another headbutt. So anyway, we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, it's wrestling. I heard someone, it was on the Daily Zeitgeist podcast. I love that show. So Jack O'Brien from Crack does this podcast. And someone was talking about wrestling, and it might have been the Hunt. Sorry, apologies. It was a podcast I heard this week. So someone on a podcast somewhere, look it up, was like, wrestling is underrated. If you leave out the like transphobia, homophobia, sexism, this, and this, it's actually pretty fun. It's like, yeah, wrestling is it's a problematic activity to enjoy, but it is fun. Just as a tease, we talked about this a few times on the show. Patrick and I have been working, mostly Patrick, with just me answering a few questions to him. We had a position adjustment issue. This is something that comes up every year because we're scraping from different feeds. And so when we update a feed, sometimes the position adjustment gets messed up. The position adjustment was slightly off this year. We found the bug. We fixed it. So the position looks right. This is good news because now LeBron James is the best player in the NBA. We might have to backfill it. Now, the good news, the thing that's going to come out of this is we are going to release basically our ingredient list, if that makes any sense, on what we do for positions, et cetera. So, because we, with all of the talk we give to the plus minus statistics and dredge and all these other ones that we hate, like basically regularized, adjusted, plus minus, ESPN's RPM, a lot of the plus minus variant, they're too black boxish. Even win shares up until recently was very black boxish. And we've always kind of argued, well, there's a walkthrough of ours. And that is true. The wins produced statistic has always had a public walkthrough that you could replicate the steps. And then we've always listed how we put players in position. So in theory, we're going to make that slightly more overt. And then that way it's like, here's how our metric works. Here's how you can use it. If you have disagreements on positions, you can tell us and we can go from there. So we are moving towards that. So I'm happy that we got to there. That's pretty much it. Let's see. I got just one more shout out to pbpstats.com, and you can follow that at bballport on Twitter. Fantastic resource. Like I said, I'm loving all the new NBA data. Just start using it. Analysts, for F's sake, I see way too much. I see thinking that missed shots are bad. You have all the data to tell you that. So those are my shout outs. Bryan, if you have any shout outs, I'll let you do that, and then that'll be our show.
No, I got none. Let's take us out.
Let's take us out. All right. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com for our tools, and you can find write-ups at nerdnumbers.com for analysis. Sorry, I missed last week, was doing taxes. We go live every week. We're going to change it to Tuesday. I've got some appointment issues. So Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv /Nerd Numbers. And you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I'm Nerd Numbers on Twitter. Bryan is Boxscore Bryan on Twitter. Co-host in spirit, Patrick Minton is
shout
NBA.
out to his dog.
Okay, yeah. Get well soon, whiskey.
Yep.
And then anyway, I think I got everything, Bryan. If not, listen to an old show if I may have missed something on the tease. We'll talk to you next time.